You're listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. I started this podcast to learn what makes people resilient after challenging events and how they've used those series of events as a catalyst for change in their life. You'll hear stories of resiliency and strength, so get ready, sit back, and be prepared to be inspired. Today I'll be speaking to Michelle Anhang. She's a certified life coach who specializes in supporting individuals and families living with mental health challenges, as well as those moving forward after loss. In addition to coaching, Michelle is a motivational speaker who shares her story on becoming widowed at the age of 34 when her husband died by suicide, and how she navigated her way through stigma, shame, and her own mental health challenges to rebuild her life intentionally. So thank you, Michelle, for coming on my podcast, Catalyst for Change, Stories of Resiliency. I'm really curious to hear about your story of resilience after a big event in your life. Can you tell me a little bit more about your story?
Sure. And I want to start by thanking you for having me on your show. It's great to be here. So 14 years ago, I was 34 years old. I was married, had two kids. I'll still have them, but my kids were 7 and 4. And sadly, my husband died by suicide. He had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and a form of schizophrenia a couple of years earlier. And unfortunately, by the time we got the diagnosis and, just till as they were trying to sort out the right treatment for him, he just got progressively worse and lost hope.
Oh my goodness, how traumatic for you, and your kids were so young to deal with that. How did you manage their big feelings, and how did you manage your own big feelings through that?
It's a good question. I'll start with my youngest son. He was 4 at the time, and he didn't even have big feelings because at that age they don't fully understand what death means.
Yeah.
And the first question when I told him Daddy's gone, and he said, "Oh, is Daddy like a mummy on Scooby-Doo?" Because that's what he understood dead happens to dead people. You're wrapped in toilet paper and you walk around the streets with your arms outstretched. And while I can laugh now, that was really his only frame of reference. And it was only till a year later, when all this time had passed, then one day he said to me, like, Daddy's not coming back, is he? And so that's when it started for him. But it was very hard for him to process. My older son was 7 at the time, and he stepped into alpha male role. Like, he was just like, "Mom, I'm the man of the house and I will take care of you." And it was like, "No, you're 7, you need to be a kid." So he didn't fully express his emotions either, I think, because he felt that he needed to take care of me and protect me.
Yeah.
I was quite emotional at the time. But I think we were all kind of trying to be strong for one another, and not fully grieving. And as I mentioned to you in our chat earlier, when my husband passed away and the family was gathering within the first couple of hours after we got the news, one of the family members turned to me and said, "What are we going to tell people?" And
Okay.
I came from a shame-driven family. I married into one. This was kind of the way our community was. We didn't talk about mental illness. We didn't talk about suicide. And so, right away we went to the place of, let's just say it was an accident. And so, going back to what I was saying about not fully being able to grieve, it was really hard for me to then be able to reconcile, like, okay, how can I grieve openly when I'm not grieving a suicide? I'm pretending it was an accident. So I can't talk about the stuff that's really coming up.
And how did that it feels like you were living a double life. Like there's some people that didn't know and some people that did know what happened. And how did that show up in your life? And how did that affect your life?
Oh gosh, in every way. I think the easier question to answer is, how did it not affect my life?
Yeah.
But, and really only a very small group of people knew. It was the immediate family, a handful of very close friends, and everybody was kind of willing to like, let's just not go there. Let's not touch it. And so, I was completely, as you said, living this double life.
Yeah.
And it impacted my mental health. I withdrew a lot because, I couldn't grieve, and I didn't grieve. So I got depressed, which then, exacerbates the isolation. But I also wasn't letting people in too close to me because I didn't want to go to that place. And I knew, like, 34 years old, generally you're not meeting widows, and, meeting new people, or even just talking about the death. I couldn't do that with my friends. So I really was withdrawn a lot, wore masks. And I also developed severe anxiety of worrying, what if we get, called out for the truth? What if somebody says something accidentally, or somebody overhears something? What if, and we didn't tell my kids the truth either, justifying it that, well, I said to myself, like, I don't understand how this happened. Like, he didn't give us any signs. So it took me a long time to reconcile that. So I thought, I'm being a good mom, that I don't want to put this on my kids either. And it's, if it's an accident, it just seems so much easier to explain to them. So I was always living in fear that they might accidentally find out.
And did they end up finding out and did you tell them the truth?
Thankfully, they never found out from anybody else. I was the one to tell them the truth, but it was almost 11 years of carrying this, telling this lie and carrying this secret.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really, only after I did a lot of healing and that I was able to get to the point to tell them.
And how did you heal from this?
So, my life obviously went from bad to worse. And I say obviously because here I was living this lie, not mentally in a healthy place at all. I made a lot of choices that, I don't regret anything, because I think things happen for a reason, but I can see how I made a lot of unhealthy choices from this place of being unhealthy. And really, for me, the catalyst was being in a relationship that was very unhealthy. And it reached a point where I just was like, I can't do this anymore. I can't live this way anymore. I was also in a job that, while it was secure, it was not where I was supposed to be. And I felt, that, oh, well, who am I to go out and, dream of something bigger? And, I should just be grateful. I'm a single mom. I'm raising my kids. I have security here. But I hated going in every day. I just wasn't happy. Yeah. And so it really got to a point where everything just seemed to be happening all at once. I was also, turning 45. So my midlife reassessment, we'll call it, it was a crisis. Of just saying, like, I can't do this anymore. I am in so much pain. I can't live the next half of my life like this. And I finally made the commitment to myself for the first time of, I will do whatever it takes to heal, because I saw, like, the patterns were my patterns. Like, this person I was in a relationship was one example, but it was, there were other men as well, that were also not healthy. So it was kind of like the same story, different person. And I just kind of woke up to that fact of, like, okay, what's the part I'm playing in this? And saying, like, okay, I can change that.
The patterns that you have established, the relationships and the job and,
all of it. It was everything I was tolerating. And I had no idea how I was going to do it. I just knew, it got so bad. I was just like, it has to be done. Like, I'm not going to live a long life if I continue this way, because I was really, like, I had chronic pain at that point, and then on top of the mental illness, and I was just so unhealthy. And for me, the first step was choosing to go back to therapy.
Okay. And therapy, it sounds like, is that the starting point of you figuring things out and unteasing those knots that had built up, basically.
Yeah. I found a great therapist who I was just able to sit and be with all of it. And, was carrying so much shame. And this was shame that, didn't begin when my husband passed away. And as I mentioned, I came from a shame-driven family. So, there were a lot of restrictions in my life, and then, throwing religious shame on top of that. And so many, many layers of shame that got me to that point of saying, yeah, I'm not going to tell the truth about the illness, because we hadn't talked about the mental illness. Nobody knew about it. So then when he died suddenly, there was, it was like, now how do we explain a suicide? And, my own internal shame around, could I have done something differently? Did I do enough? We go through that when there's a suicide, when we're close to people.
Yeah.
And so I had internalized so much, and there was a lot that I needed to tease out, to heal from, and to separate from, and to recognize these stories were told to me. This is not who I am.
Yeah.
And a lot of this shame is not mine. And, and I kind of described it. It was like I was carrying this backpack of shame around all the time. And if somebody had their own shame, it was like, here, give it to me. I'll carry it for you, because I'm already carrying so much of my own.
Because you're so used to it with the chronic pain, and everything was coming from all that shame that you were carrying about something you had no control over.
Yeah.
Do you think there could have been anything you could have? I don't think you could have done anything about your husband's mental health challenges. No. You were doing everything that you could by, he was trying to figure out his medication regimen for the bipolar and schizoaffective disorder. Yeah. He was working on that. You were working on that as a couple.
Yeah.
You just didn't you don't have to tell everybody. That's not your,
right.
You don't have to involve everybody in that,
right,
to bring on more shame.
Yeah.
But it sounds, how rough. That's tough.
And unfortunately too, when, suicides don't make sense when they happen. And so often our first default is to look to others of like, did they do enough too? So, there is an element of finger pointing, and there were people asking me questions of like, well, why didn't you do this? Well, I actually did do that. Why didn't you do that? So, and I understand now, having been healed, I understand, they were just trying to make sense of it. And I went through that same thing too. And I was blaming family members that I didn't think were as supportive as they could have been. So we all go to that place, but at the time it added to the shame that I was already feeling, having it named too, like, oh, I'm not the only one who's wondering if I did enough. They're also wondering that. So,
so they add to it.
Yeah. It was so many layers.
So many layers. And so that therapist, it sounds like, was the first step to getting to where you're at now.
Yeah.
And tell me about that road that you traveled to where you're at now.
Yeah. So I worked with her quite a bit, and, working through, childhood stuff too, and where it stemmed from, and really being able to separate that and step more into my worthiness. And during that period of time, I also started coaches training, which, I'm so grateful to one of my closest friends who had just become a coach at that time. And I had no clue what coaching was. I knew she's a coach, don't know what it is, never even thought to look into it. And she was just like, you need to try this course. It's, it's 3 days. Go do it. I was working in management, and she said, you'll get some great skills out of it if you don't want to continue, but I really think you should try it out. And literally just to get her off my back, I went to this course. And, the first day I was really just, a deer caught in the headlights of like, oh my God, where am I? Because this is a room full of people that are open about their emotions, which I was told, like, we don't go there. Like, I was always told I was too emotional, and tame it and be quiet, and it's too big and too much.
Yeah.
And here they are, that's all we're talking about is how we're feeling about things, and it's not therapy. And the other piece of it too was one of the exercises we did was they put a sticker on everyone's forearm, and on it was written the word fail. and you got a star on, like somebody would write a star on your sticker every time you failed at something. And so here I am again thinking like, what? Like, wait a minute,
It's
I'm a
opposite.
perfectionist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I can't fail. What does this mean? Like, how are we celebrating this?
Yeah.
But then, you know, as the weekend progressed, it was like, I love this. Like, these are my people. I just never found them. And, you know, and that kind of led to the next step of my healing, was realizing that, you know, the people around me loved me, but they were all very much of the same mindset.
Yeah.
And I needed to connect with people who were more like-minded, who were
Mm.
open, who embraced things that I, you know, was now working towards accepting in myself.
Yeah.
These were all people who were doing the same and talking about it.
Okay.
And so their support was so vital to me in my healing, of just, you know, it's okay to be who you are. You can be as big and messy as you want to be, and we
Mm.
celebrate that and we love you for that. And you know, at first it was you know, a challenge for me to even trust it, but then I saw like, no, these people keep showing up, and I can throw like the craziest stuff at them, like the worst of my stuff, and they're just like, that's awesome. Like I remember my friend saying to me, like, as I was opening up, and she said, you know, you're giving me so much more of you to love, you know. And
Yeah, because you've had challenges and that you overcome them, or you're
right,
struggling with something that maybe they could feel good by helping you, or you know, those kind of
yeah.
things. It's a gift sharing that your struggles.
Right. Yeah. And that was, you know, again, just changing a story that I have of like, you know, oh, we're private people. We don't talk about these things, you know,
Mm.
that's a family thing. We don't discuss it with people outside the family, and changing that, and like, no, we actually do. And it's so healing. It's a different level of connection.
Yeah.
And so, you know, finding that, it was just like, okay, now I want more people like that.
Okay.
And, you know, and just seeing even like the shifts in my relationships with the people that I already, you know, friends, family, you know, some people were great with it and opened up to it too. Other people kind of fell away a little bit just because they couldn't, you know, they had their own stuff around it that they weren't
Yeah.
ready to work through, you know, whatever happened. It evolved slowly, but essentially I ended up growing this network of a second family that were, you know, committed to growth, committed to healing, and, you know, committed to themselves and having, you know, an impact in the world. And that was where I wanted to be.
And that
And
started during that 3-day coaching course.
yes,
Oh,
yeah.
and what was that course called?
So it's the Coaches Training Institute.
Mm.
And so, yes, it's the first course they offer. So you can take it as a one-off, or you can continue and do, there are 4 other courses after that, and then a certification program. But
Okay.
yeah, it was really wonderful. And that's just one, like there are so many of these programs out there.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, that's one thing that I realized in my healing. It's just like, okay, if I want something, look for it. You know, it's out there. I just
Mm-hmm.
might not know where. I can ask people, I can Google it, but you know, it's that realization that the world was so much bigger than my little world that I was
Yeah.
in.
And were you able to go back to your family and your partner, your and his family, and you know those people that were filled with you know that shame type of behaviors, you know, upbringing? Were you able to bring those people out of those trenches with you as you got through this yourself?
um, Not so much.
Okay.
I think, you know, you know, everyone has their own journey, and,
Yeah.
you know, I
Yeah.
respect where they're at.
Yeah.
And it just, you know, they were not able to connect with what, you know, what I was experiencing, what I was going through.
Mm.
You know, there are you know, there are a small few, and again, only by speaking about it did others, you know, the ones that were on the same path, say like, oh, I'm in that space too. So it definitely opened me up to which families were in that space and which ones were not.
Yeah.
But it gave me a different way then to raise my children, to be with my children.
Yeah.
And, you know, a more loving, more accepting way, which, you know, I'm so grateful that I was gifted that, because they were young enough that I could then, you know, I mean, this was 14 years ago, so they're now 21 and 18.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I was able to raise them into young men who are emotionally intelligent and, you know, have, you know, feel that they are accepted and, you know, have worth just for existing, not for having, you know, accomplishments.
Yeah.
And we have amazing, authentic conversations. And, you know, and that's really where I got to the point after doing so much of this. It was like, you know what, I want to have that authentic conversation with my kids
Yeah.
and tell them the truth and not carry that. And
And
so
how
I did
old were
that.
they when you told them the truth about their father?
It wasn't that long ago. They were 18 and 15. So about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, and again, so grateful for the support of my friends who, you know, and the fellow coaches who were really there for me through the whole process. You know, I had a close group of friends who, you know, and being coaches, we're on Zoom all the time. And so, you know, we were
Yeah.
using Zoom back then, but we had a Zoom call the day before where everybody was, you know, championing me and cheering me on and helping me get the courage. And, you know, because I was terrified. I was like, they may never speak to me again. And I, you know, needed
And
to
how
prepare for
did,
that too.
yeah. And how did that go when you did tell them?
So first thing I want to say is fear is a liar. You know, that's my biggest message that I, you know, if you take anything away from this, know that, because it went beautifully,
Okay.
and nothing that I had imagined would happen happened.
Hmm.
You know, you know, and it was really as simple as like, I called them up for dinner and sat them, you know, they sat at the table and I said, before we eat, I want to tell you something. And I was just very matter of fact. I said, listen, it's about when your dad died. You know, we didn't tell you at the time. And I want you to know the truth now. And I told them, and they were both amazing. They just said, you know, we wish we had known from the beginning, but we understand why you did what you did, because they understood how the family was, you know, very much about secrets and things
Yeah.
like that. So, and, you know, and it was further validation for me to trust the kids that I had raised.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, this is the person I've become in the last few years.
Hmm.
So this is how I've raised them. So of course they would be open-hearted about it and compassionate. And so, you know, it's really like each little courageous step
Yeah.
helped me, you know, gain more courage. And that's, you know, there's a line from the book. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's essentially, you know, if you want to overcome shame, if you want to feel courageous, start stepping into it slowly. Like, be proud of the choices that you're making. And for me, it was like I was always so shame driven that I was making choices that just kept perpetuating that. I made choices that I was ashamed of. And
Yeah.
then when I decided to heal, it was like, okay, I want to be proud of myself. And I was just one step after the next making choices that I was proud of. That and eventually the shame disappeared. It was like, no, you know what? Like, okay, you know, and baby steps, of course. Like, I didn't get to telling my kids from, you know, a month into therapy. Like, it took
Yeah.
time and little steps. Like, the first one was, you know, even ending the relationship I was in,
Mm.
leaving the job I wasn't happy in. And
Yeah.
then little ones of just, you know, friendships that were perpetuating that shame, because, you know, we create these dynamics with
Hmm.
people, and realizing, okay, create boundaries. And each time I did, it strengthened me to keep going with it. Because it was like, you know what, I'm really proud of myself for doing that. I set a boundary here. I'm going to
Yeah.
do it again. And so one thing led to the next and to the next.
Yeah. And what are there any other tools? You've learned a lot of things from this experience, and it
Mm-hmm.
sounds like you turned it into something you could grow from. You
Yeah.
became, you know, a better mother to your
Yeah.
children, more authentic, it sounds like. You didn't carry
Yes.
on that legacy of shame and blame and
Yeah.
feeling bad about things. You actually taught them to be a wonderful young men, it sounds like. What other tools have you learned along the way that you could share with us?
Yeah. So, along with the therapy work that I did, I also had to do work around my PTSD, which, I had
Yeah.
around the suicide, and I had, trauma earlier in my life that I needed to work through. So I do want to mention, I did do trauma work as well. There's EMDR. I did other somatic work because, trauma gets trapped in your body. And so that was a big piece of it. And through that, I knew about mindfulness and I knew about meditation, but it was really hard for me. And now I know why, because with the PTSD, I didn't feel safe sitting and I didn't feel safe slowing down. I felt like I need to just keep moving.
Yeah.
And mindfulness was a huge, huge tool that I still use and now work with my clients on, of just being present, being in the moment, creating that mind-body connection, which happens with mindfulness, of just like noticing, okay, what's happening in my body? Oh, I'm noticing that I'm a little bit nervous. Okay, what might be causing that? And just really just questioning things, getting curious about things, letting go of judgment, and just, coaching myself constantly. Really, it's
Yeah.
just like, okay, stay in the moment, because, going into the past would just have me depressed of, with the regrets. And then,
Yeah.
or there's the anxiety that caused from being in the future. And it's like, okay, I can't, I have no control over that. And accepting that. And it's like, okay, what can I control right here, right now?
Yeah.
And that was a huge gift for me, of just like, okay, this is what's within my control right now. I'm going
Mm.
to do that. And then, and again, just bite-sized pieces. Sometimes it was really down to, okay, I can control the way my hair looks. I'm going to go blow dry my hair or put on some makeup. It was really sometimes as simple as that.
Yeah. What you
When
have.
I would feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And living a healthier lifestyle overall. I mean, self-care comes from being mindful as well, because we're learning a new way of being when we're more attentive to ourselves. And it's like, okay, what do I need right now? Like, yes, I'm feeling the nerves coming up, maybe, whatever the reason is, what can I give myself in this moment?
Yeah.
And so seeing how I can be loving to myself. And another big piece, which is part of the self-care, was noticing how I talk to myself.
Mm.
We all have the voice in our head that, like, I think we all agree that we would never speak that way to anybody else.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
paying attention to the way that I was programmed to speak to myself, from the upbringing, was very shaming.
Yeah.
And, I mean, listen, anytime that we make a mistake and we're like, oh, you're so stupid for doing that. It's like, no, wait, I don't need to do that to myself. And so
Yeah.
really I would catch myself and be like, no, I made a mistake because I'm human, and that's what humans do.
Yeah.
And it's just as simple as that. Like, I'm actually not stupid. I'm smart, and I'm figuring this out. And
Yeah.
so giving myself that compassion of, baby steps, and it takes time, and, honoring the process of it, and being kind. And when I work with my clients, I call it the friend test of just, would you set this bar for a friend of yours? If your friend came to you and said they were doing this, what would you tell them? And that's how we need to speak to ourselves. So
Yeah.
really retraining my mind. And then from that place, as I became kinder to myself, it was just, the next logical or obvious or organic place that it moved to was just taking care of my body, of knowing when I need rest, honoring that. I'm a person who needs 8 or 9 hours of sleep, and I never gave myself that, because I was always like, oh, I've got to clean the kitchen before I go to bed. I have to do this. I have to do that. And
Yeah.
so I was always tired, which of course then, doesn't help our health. So then honoring, what, I'm going to bed early, this because I feel better. And then, eating better, exercising, like all of these things, more from a place of like honoring my body and myself as the temple that it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and then the more we do that, the more it then helps us feel better about ourselves mentally, of just like, yes, this is how I treat myself. And then it goes, into, again, in relationships, if this is how the standard I've set for myself of how I treat myself, I now don't seek out unhealthy relationships because I don't want people who are going to treat me worse than I'm treating myself.
Yeah. No,
And
that's so true.
so it keeps building on itself,
Oh,
but
good.
it's
So
all these little micro changes.
like scaffolding, your
Yeah.
scaffold, yeah, scaffolding around a building, you're building it up and building it up
Yeah.
more. And then the next layer comes on. Now it
Yeah.
sounds like you're already paying all these wonderful things forward by helping your clients with, different coaching methods, and you're
Mm-hmm.
using these tools you've learned, and this, really traumatic event that you've actually had a lot of growth from. You've been able to use that experience in your current work. And
Mm-hmm.
what would you like to share with others who may be going through the same event or some huge life event like what you did?
Yeah. Great question. I think, the number one thing is don't keep it in you. Don't keep it a secret.
Yeah.
Talk to somebody you trust, and be discerning about who you choose to talk to as well. Like if like I found for myself, like the older generation, they didn't quite have an understanding of mental illness. They couldn't quite
Mm.
wrap their head around how sick my husband was.
Yeah.
And so, if for people listening, they might not be the people you want to speak to unless you know that they're very open-minded and educated around that. But it's about just choosing people that are open-hearted, are warm, are accepting.
Yeah.
And and if you don't know those people in your life now, like we now have the benefit of, while social media is terrible for us in some ways, it's
Mm.
also amazing because there are so many groups. You think about Facebook, you can Facebook or search any type of support group for whatever you're going through,
Yeah.
and find people in a similar situation who are showing up for each other in big ways. Right now, I mean, the pandemic is terrible, and at the same time, so many support groups have moved online.
Yeah.
So where we might not have had access to them before, just depending on location or time, they're more readily available. So
Yeah.
you can be going to a support group, for whatever issue, with people in a different country or a different state. So it's there. So just know there are people out there who want to support you, who want to be with you. And I know for me, I could not have done it without these people.
Yeah.
And so, we're not meant to do this alone. and
That's
and
so
it's,
true.
so that's the first step. And from that place, then whatever you're feeling called to do, and whatever work healing work you need to do, you'll figure it out. But it's so much better to do it with others.
Yes, no, that's really important to mention. And it sounds like, you figured out these tools. There is help out there. There's NAMI, which is National Association of Mental Illness, I believe. There's a lot of different help out there. There's suicide awareness campaigns. And you're right,
Yeah.
this social media has its negative aspects, but it does have a lot of good. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of people sharing their story. I'm on Facebook groups for helping people with different ailments or
Right.
sharing things. There's a lot of support groups on Facebook, which most
Yes.
people are on. So wonderful. And then one more question I wanted to ask you:
Mhm.
how do you start your day or finish your day that keeps you on track in a positive mindset?
Mm. So it's how I start my day. So again, I now make sure I get a good night's sleep. So I'm waking up well rested.
Hmm.
I do a meditation, um, and I go for a walk.
Hmm.
And that for me, or if the weather's not good enough for that, I'm doing I'll do a YouTube workout. There are
Yeah.
so many free workouts, whatever
Yep.
type of exercising you like, if it's yoga or kickboxing, it's all
Yeah.
free, any length of time. But that's the time for me. I might do a little bit of journaling. Gratitude journals are amazing to do. Just write down 3 things you're grateful for.
Yeah.
Will shift it, and that you can do that any time of day. But I start my day that way, and I'll usually set an intention for myself of, like, just a word of, what do I want to embrace today,
Yeah.
and like for me today, it's like, it's openness. So I'm just being open to whatever shows up. And so having that intention, I'm being more mindful, I'm being more aware, and I feel better and more grounded in my day moving through it, having done all of these practices.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm going to have all of your details and where to find you on social media, your website, and our show notes so people know how to get in touch with you if they want to learn more about what you're doing to pay it forward these days. And thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Catalyst for Change, and my name is Jessica Huckabee, your host. Join us next week for another story of resiliency. And please subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, and feel free to leave me a comment or email me at catalystforchange20@gmail.com, or on Facebook, we have a page at Catalyst for Change Resiliency.